This is PT Pro Talk, the podcast for physical therapists who want to improve their clinical skills and be more successful. I'm Mariana Parks, physical therapist and your host, and today I interview Dr. Chad Cook, a clinical researcher, physical therapist, and a profession advocate with a history of clinical care, excellence, and service. And today we talked about profit, Perils, and peer-reviewed publishing. Dr. Cook has authored and co-authored 3 textbooks and has published over 330 peer-reviewed manuscripts. In our discussion today, you are going to learn about the publishing process, how much authors have to pay to publish, how much a publishing company makes, what predatory journals are, and the future for publishing. So if you feel this information is valuable, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel, click on the notification bell to stay updated, give us a thumbs up, and share with other clinicians that you feel might benefit from this conversation. I hope you enjoyed the show. PT Pro Talk podcast is only possible with the support of the forward-looking and innovative companies like Systems for PT, the Do Anything, Anytime EMR. Systems for PT develops systems for clinics so you can focus on your patients. Go to systemsforpt.com to schedule a demo today.
Fitter First, your first choice for the best Canadian-made rehab and fitness products since 1985.
Hi Ted, welcome to PT Pro Talk. How are you today?
I am very well. It's such a pleasure to be here and to finally meet you.
Awesome. We finally set a time and I'm excited to talk to you about our topic today. So before we jump right in, just tell us a little bit about yourself for the ones that don't know you.
Okay. So I'm Chad Cook. I am a physical therapist. I've been a therapist for 33 years. I'm presently a professor at Duke University, and my primary role there is research. Probably most importantly, I have a family. I have a wife that I've also been married 33 years to, and 3 boys that are grown, 2 that are in college, and 1 in med school, and just a very lucky guy.
Awesome. And today we're going to discuss the peer-reviewed publishing. So can you give the listeners your background in publishing?
Sure. Yeah. So my first role in publishing was 2005. I was an associate editor for the journal called Physical Therapy. And then in 2006, I became an editor-in-chief of the Journal of Manual and Manipulative Therapy and held that position for about 6 years. I took 3 days off from that and went on to become an associate editor at a journal called Manual Therapy, and I'm presently an associate editor at JOSPT. So for the last 18 years, I've been involved with a number of journals. I'm also an editorial board member for 4 other journals, so I really have had a lot of immersion into the peer-reviewed system.
Yeah, so you have a lot of experience on that area, and I know you publish a lot of papers too. So can you talk a little bit about the process of publishing a paper and who is involved?
Sure. I think it's actually good to understand the process because it's a lot more convoluted than what I think people think. So let's say there's a scientist, a researcher, and they get funding externally to do their research. They do a trial. A typical trial takes 2 to 3 years. They complete that work, they write it up, and then they submit it to a peer-reviewed journal. And that journal, at that point, the editor will look at the paper, see if it fits the context of the journal, see if it's good enough that it would fit into that journal. If it is, they'll send it out for peer review, and they'll ask for volunteers to peer review it. So the peer reviewers are going to be similar researchers like the person who submitted the paper. There's usually 2, sometimes 3, in rare occasions 4. They will provide their input. There will often be a back and forth where you have to make edits based on the recommendations of the peer reviewer. And then finally, the paper is either rejected or it's accepted. And that process tends to take anywhere from 6 months to 8 months. It takes a long time to get a paper published. If a paper is accepted, there are a lot of journals in which you actually have to pay as an author to have that paper published in that journal. That's an open access journal. And that's a whole different discussion that's probably worth going into, but some journals you don't have to pay into, but many of the newer journals are moving toward open access and pay to publish.
Okay, so that's a long time that you just described. So, in average, would take how long to get a paper published since the beginning of the process?
Oh gosh, if you count the time it takes to actually do the research and data collect, it's a good 3 years that you are with a
Yeah, that's
project.
a long time.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting because it's easy to criticize research, I think, on the outside, but people don't know how much work actually goes into it.
Oh, yes. Yeah, a lot of work. And do you think that the reviewers should be paid?
Oh, I do. So in a given week, I'm asked to review 3 to 5 papers, and I do every single one of them for free. I do it because I've committed to the science and I want to give back. But the reviewers, on average, spend a good hour reviewing the paper and making recommendations, and they get nothing for that. So reviewers do it for no pay, but the journal itself makes money from that process. So it's almost,
Right.
it's very similar to when our students in a higher education setting go on a clinical affiliation. The people that take the students are not paid in most cases. They're doing the work for free. I believe they should be compensated too. And I also believe that reviewers should be compensated.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a lot of work. If you get 3 a week, it's a lot of time that you have to spend just reviewing it. Um, and do you think that authors should have to pay to publish?
That's a really great question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. So I do believe that in some situations, if you're given the opportunity and it costs a little bit more to make your research available to more people through open access, then paying is not a bad thing. Mariana, I think the problem is the how much they're being asked to pay. So on average,
Sure.
it's about $2,300 to get a paper, to pay for a paper to get it accepted. That's the average. But there are some journals like Nature is close to $12,000 to publish a paper. And I think that's
Oh
ridiculous.
my God.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
and it costs somewhere between $200 to $1,000 for that publishing company to do the work to get that paper out there, to pay the editor, to pay the copy editor. So they're making a lot of money. So I think it's okay to
But
charge the author. I think maybe they're charging the authors too much right now.
yes, that's an insane amount of money. Um, and on those that charge the authors, just the ones with open access? Is that right?
It is, and that allows the paper to be freely available to the public. And you probably feel the same way I do. The science needs to be available to the public. If the work is out there, then the people need to be able to have access to the work. If the federal government
Mhm.
supports research, then that research should be available to the public because the public tax dollars actually paid for that. But it's not always the case. There are many journals in which the work is actually firewalled. You can't get access to it.
Yes. That's unfortunately for the clinicians that wanted to get access to the information. And then I heard that in Germany, the journals pay authors to publish. And why doesn't that occur here?
And you're right. That you're correct. There, in many cases, the unique journals in Germany will actually pay their authors a fee because they're taking their work and they're putting it in their journal. I'm not really sure why it doesn't happen anywhere else. The big areas where most of the medical journals are either out of Great Britain or out of the United States, and China has grown a lot recently with their journals too. And none of their models are similar to Germany. They don't pay people to publish. It's all either you pay or you submit your work voluntarily. So I
Uh-huh.
think the biggest reason why they don't do that in the United States, Great Britain, or China is because it's so easy to make money. So this may stun you, but publishing companies, there are really only 5 that control most of the biomedical publishing, like Elsevier, Wiley, Springer, Taylor and Francis, and then I think a group called C&M. And they control most of the publishing, and their profit margins are over 36%. So they're making a greater profit margin than Apple and Google and Amazon and all these really large companies. They make somewhere between 100 to
Wow.
200 billion a year in profits. So I doubt
Wow.
I don't
Oh
think they're
my
going to
goodness.
change their model. It's stunning, isn't
It's
it?
working well for them. Why they would if they're making that much money?
Yeah,
That's crazy.
I think that's been one of the biggest complaints. And getting to your earlier question of should peer reviewers be paid? Absolutely. I mean, there is money there to pay a peer reviewer, but they're not
Yeah.
paid anything. It's voluntary.
Yeah. And do you think that maybe just thinking here out loud that in Germany, they don't have that many authors and they want to stimulate people to publish? And versus here, maybe they have more people researching and doing the work, so they don't feel like they have to incentivize people to publish.
I think you may be onto something. I think that may be correct. I have some colleagues out of Germany who I could ask, but I've never asked that question. I think potentially, too, the German journals are interested in a directed journal. In other words, they solicit work that they want to put into a special issue or a directed issue, but I'm sure you probably have some German listeners that will know the answer to that question. I really don't know the answer.
I know that there's been a lot of negative press recently with the peer review publishing. Can you give us like some thoughts on why this is the case?
I think there are several reasons. For starters, they make a lot of money, and people lose a lot of money in the process. The authors who have to pay, peer reviewers who aren't paid, for many of the reasons we just discussed. I think it seems like researchers are being taken advantage of. The second thing is because it's become such a big industry, you've seen the growth of a lot of questionable journals. Now, even going beyond predatory journals, which is a whole different topic, and these are fake journals who really exist just to take the money from the researchers, and there's no true peer review. But journals exist in a spectrum, right? There's some really high-quality journals that really are restrictive on the quality that goes into them. And then there are journals that'll basically take anything, and the science is very weak. And then there's some work in the middle that it's very questionable. They just exist to make money. And these publishing companies will sometimes publish 10,000, 15,000 papers a year, and just to make money. And it's less about the science, and it's more about profit. And I think most scientists have concerns about that because what we're seeing is a very watered down product in research. So I think that's the biggest reason.
How do they make money, these journals? Is with the authors paying to publish and then they selling the journal to the public? Is that like the main ways that they get revenue?
Yeah, the biggest money they make is through library subscriptions. So if you're an academic institution, you're going to want to have all the major journals in your library so that your students can have access to it, so your faculty can actually pull the data and pull the studies so they can read them. And if you don't have those, then you'll hear a lot of complaints because, if you're a really stellar institution, you want to have all the available research. But the cost associated with a library subscription is substantial. And there have been several universities that have stood up against Elsevier and other companies and said, we're not paying your fees, we're not paying your rates. And in almost every case, the publishing companies still win because there are only 5 of them and they control almost all the science. So The big money is through library subscriptions, additional money through authors, and then that third way, which you kind of mentioned before, when clinicians are looking to get access to a paper and it's firewalled, and it says you can buy this paper for $48 or $68 or something like that. They make a little money off of that as well.
Yeah. And how do you know, like talking about what you were saying before, how do you know if the publishing company is serious? Like, how do you know if they are not just one of those companies that are there for the profit versus the ones that are serious and publish good work?
It's a great question. It isn't as easy as what one thinks. We're really seeing the blurring of lines between what is a reputable publishing company versus one that is questionable. Let me give you an example. For the last couple of years, a lot of people have published in a group called MDPI, and it's a publishing group that they published, I think, 150 special issues last year. They published thousands of articles, and it has this questionable peer review process. Well, just this year, it has been suggested that they're probably predatory and of lower quality, and it is suggested that the scientists will stay away from those. For the longest time, though, they were kind of in the middle, and people didn't know if they should publish there or not, so people did, because it's easier to get a paper in there versus somewhere else. I think you have to look at the publishing company. So if it's Elsevier, Springer, somebody like that, they tend to have reputable journals affiliated with it. If that journal is also affiliated with a scientific organization that you're familiar with, like if it's affiliated with the American Physical Therapy Association, or if it's affiliated with the Academy of Orthopaedics, then you know that the organization will assure that the quality is there because their reputation is on the line. So I look for those things when I consider publishing in a journal. I tend to publish in just a few journals and try not to dabble in a bunch of different ones that I'm not familiar with. And, there are over 11,000 journals. So it's really, there are so many now that it's almost impossible to know all the journals.
That's a lot. 11,000 journals. And I guess, why do you think that people don't create more publishing companies if they are just dominated by these 5? Could that be part of like a possible solution for that control and how they charge so much?
There used to be more, but the big 5 have consolidated. They've purchased those. Like I worked for Manny when I was the editor-in-chief. Manny is part of Taylor and Francis now. So a lot of the publishing companies that were independent have been kind of pulled in. And it's almost like the automobile industry, right? There used to be 50, 60 automotive makers in the United States, and now there are primarily 3. So it's common, I think, in business that you see kind of a paring down of that. I'm not sure if adding more publishing companies will make a huge difference unless the model changes. But we've seen the big thing has been consolidation of publishing companies.
Yeah. And it looks like now it's a lot about the business since they are so profitable. I'm still thinking about those big numbers that you mentioned before. So I think it's really easy to lose track of quality and just think about the profit versus the science.
I agree. I think it's concerning. I think it's very concerning. And especially with respect to how does this influence science? And if we can just take a step to the side, if it becomes easier to publish your work, and if we're in an academic situation, if you're a faculty member, your currency is grant funding and publishing. So the more publications you get, the easier it is for you to rank up and to get a higher pay raise and a number of other things. So you've seen some faculty that have taken the bait and are publishing in some of these weaker journals, these predatory journals, so they can put it on their CV. And it's happening so quickly that it's very difficult for promotion and tenure committees to really know what's going on. They don't know which journals are legitimate journals, which aren't. There aren't any blacklists out now that say these journals are bad, these journals are good. So it takes somebody who really understands the industry well. And unfortunately, there aren't that many people like that. So we're in a difficult time. I think things are changing quite a bit.
And when you mention predatory journals, what do you mean by that?
Great question. So it's a term that was coined by Jeffrey Beal, who was a librarian. And so he really understood, he's the type of person who really understands publishing, right? Because he's the one who negotiates with publishing companies. He started seeing a lot of companies he'd never heard of that had very questionable peer-reviewed practices. So what I described very early about it going to peer-reviewed individuals, and they reviewed the paper, and it was back and forth, and it took 6 to 8 months, he was noticing that a lot of the work was being published in a week or 2 weeks. And we know that you can't go through a full peer review and changing of the information and all of this process. It had to have skipped the peer-reviewed part. So predatory journals are those who don't have a true peer review. So there's not scientific oversight. It purely just takes the paper and publishes it. And if you don't mind, I'll give you an example of a sting that we put together. We actually wrote a fake paper. And in the paper, we had a person who was dead for 5 years. And in the paper, we talk about using manual therapy on this dead person. And we brought him back to life. And we had all of these jokes and silly things written into the paper. We had pictures of seeds germinating. We had a paint by number picture, nothing that had anything to do with the situation. And the paper was accepted in less than a week in one of the predatory journals. So, I mean,
wow.
if they take a completely outlandish paper like this, then they're also going to take data that were just slightly tweaked or slightly changed so that it contributes to misinformation. In fact, there's been a recent paper that was retracted on COVID vaccinations, and it was erroneous information that said thousands of people died from COVID vaccinations, which is not true. But this was published in one of those journals that did not have a strong peer review. So it leads to all of this misinformation, and it really erodes good science.
So you're saying it's strong peer reviewed. It looks like they haven't even read the paper. How would they allow you to publish that paper?
Again, all they have to do is read it, and they realize they're being conned from our end of it. But I don't think they even read it. They basically put it together like a real paper and then put it out there. And sadly...
That's unbelievable.
Out of my 340 papers, and that's not even a real paper, I'm probably known for that paper more than anything. And that's not even a real paper.
I'll have to look for that paper now.
Don't look for
it. That's insane. And you're saying that you review the paper. So how do they select who reviews the papers? Is that a process? Are people just invited? Are they volunteer?
So
how does it work?
When you are a volunteer, so you agree to be part of the review team for a journal. And you go in, you type up what your expertise is, what your background is, and then you give selected areas where you might say, I can review epidemiology, I can review physical therapy, I can review statistics. All of this goes into a computer system. And when a paper comes in, they look at matches, potential reviewer matches that would be good people to include as a peer reviewer. They are then invited to review the paper. They have an opportunity to say, yes, I'll review this paper, or they can say, no, it's not really in my area. So eventually you get enough people that agree to review. They finish the review process. And as I mentioned, it often takes months for this to occur. But typically, at least you have people who have some expertise in the area that you're publishing.
Okay. And when you said before that you have some papers that are open and some papers that are you have to pay to get access, do you think that this peer-reviewed publishing, they do a good job in getting science out to the readers, or you feel like most are still like not getting out in front of people?
So I think in general, publishing gets it out a little bit. All right. So the information's out there. I think there are two things that are really challenging. The first one is, and I've seen different numbers, but somewhere between 1.6 to 2.4 million papers are published every year. So that's a lot of papers, and there's just no way, no one can read all of that. And just low back pain, there are about 40,000 papers published every year. So even if you're an expert in low back pain, it's almost impossible to read all of those papers. So part of the problem is there's just too much. There's too much information. So that's never going to get to the clinicians. It's never going to get to the public. It's never going to, because there's just too much. The second challenge, I think, is that not everybody is good at either reading the paper or pursuing that information. So most physical therapists, for example, don't get their information from PubMed or from articles. They get it from continuing education courses. And that's a wild card, right? You can get 1,000 different good and bad things in a con ed course. But most people don't acquire their information from peer-reviewed publishing. So there has to be another step involved where we push that information into clinical practice. This is why I think we hear that it often takes 17 years before evidence actually gets placed into clinical practice. It's also why I don't have a problem with something like social media, which speeds that process up, I think, because it introduces people to research that they may have never heard about or read.
Yeah. Well, I guess it would be great to create a continuing education course just with updates of literature so people can stay up to date, because it is impossible. And it's just too many things, and as you said, too many different journals. So I feel like people just stick with the most common ones that they know, because it's just too many, and we normal clinicians, like, that don't understand research in depth, they're not gonna know how to differentiate the good journals and bad journals. You just know the most famous ones, the one that we know, okay, this paper is good because it was published here. But other than that, I feel it's just super hard to number one, stay up to date, and number two, to really be able to tell if the journal is a good quality journal, if it's serious, or if it's just in the industry of making money, because as you said, they do make a lot of money.
I'm in full agreement with you. And I also don't think it's fair for clinicians who work 50 hours a week and expect them to read every night and every weekend just to stay on top of the literature, knowing that they're still never going to be able to stay on top of the literature because there's just too much. So I just think you said you used the term impossible. I agree. I think it's almost impossible. I'm an academic, so I'm paid to read, and I can't stay on top of everything. I read probably 20, 25 articles a week, but I still feel like I'm always scrambling. I still have people saying, have you read this paper? I'm like, I didn't even know about that paper. So it's exceptionally difficult, I think.
Do you have any ideas, suggestions to what we could do to improve the situation?
I do. I've seen a lot of people that have taken the initiative to break down that barrier between it just got published and then I hope it trickles into the clinical or the public community. People are using infographics, a single-page infographic, which tell the story of the findings of the paper. I think those are incredibly useful. I think podcasts are exceptionally useful because somebody's in their car, especially one where they can listen to during their time to work and then back. I think those are good. I think Twitter is very effective in pushing information. There's only so much you can say on Twitter, but it can certainly lead the horse to water if they read something that they're interested in. And I think YouTube is another opportunity to move in that direction. That's why I actually support social media. I know there's a lot of incorrect information, misinformation on social media, but it really does speed the process up of assimilating some of this information.
And there is also like podcasts that they are just specific to papers and like summarizing science, which is great because we are commuting, driving, cleaning the house, cooking, whatever you're doing, you can just listen to it. It's very easy to digest. I was cooking today, listening to your previous podcast. I was like, you're just, we're busy. We have to find a way to stay up to date. So
No, I
that's
like podcasts a
a
lot.
good solution. Yeah. And do you believe in the idea of publish or perish for academia?
Yeah, that's a common term used, I think, in a tier 1 environment. So in a research-based institution, I do believe publish or perish is proper. It does exist. I would even say get funding or perish would probably even be a more appropriate statement. But yes, you are expected to publish. If you work at Duke, you are expected to publish. There's no excuse for individuals who don't do research. You are expected to be a creator, a person who creates information, not just someone who teaches information. And I do believe that's important. In smaller institutions, it doesn't seem to be as prevalent. So institutions that are more teaching related, maybe a DPT program that is in a small institution that doesn't have a really strong scholarly culture, many of those people can stay and teach in that environment without losing their position and rank up over time. So it depends on the institution, I think.
And like, so do usually institutions tell you in which journals you have to publish? Because like, okay, if you want to publish, you can just go to that journals that we talked about that we don't want to, but there is always a way. If you have to publish papers, would be probably easier to just publish on that journals that are quick. So I was just curious to know if they require you to publish in certain types of journals, or like, how does that work?
That also depends on the institution. So there are some institutions, especially in Europe, that require you to publish in a Q1 journal. So journals are ranked on how strong they are. So a Q1 would be the best, a Q4 or the fourth quarter journal. So the top 25% would be here, the lowest 25 would be here. And then there's a Q2 and a Q3. So some, for promotion and tenure, they require you to only publish in Q1 journals. Some will require you to only count the publications in those journals who have an impact factor above 3 or an impact factor above 4. So it depends on the institution. And in some cases within institutions, it depends on the department. I was at a department previously at Duke that only counted papers that had impact factors above 3. The one that I'm in now, they don't do that. They don't restrict that. But yes, indeed, it does matter the quality of the journal that you publish in.
Yeah, it makes sense, and they should require you to publish on good papers, because otherwise you're just going to be pushing on those journals that we know are not very serious. And what do you think about the future, that the future will be for publishing? And how is it going to change based on everything that we talked about how much companies are making, how much authors have to pay to publish, and the amount of papers that are coming out every year?
So I'm going to answer it by saying I don't know. But I won't stop there. I'll throw some ideas out. And I'm certainly I'm not the prime mover in this area. There are a lot of really smart people that are thinking of creative ways to improve the problem that we have. There are scientific organizations that have said enough. We are not publishing in any of these for-profit journals anymore. We're going to create our own non-for-profit journal so that all the proceeds go back into the science, and that we want to assure that the science is of high quality. So there are people that are looking at different different ways. There's open science. There is data sharing to make sure that people are on the up and up when they publish their work. So you share the data that you have. There are a lot of different ways. But getting back to your question is, do you think it will change? I think it has to change. I think at some point, the system is broken. We don't know a better way to go forward. But between you and me, I was on a panel discussion about 15 years ago, and this was the exact same topic, and nobody knew the answer then either. So it just keeps getting progressively worse, and we haven't figured it out yet. But something's going to change.
Maybe the authors get together and stay strong on their position, create maybe their own journal. Maybe something would change.
I think there's some
so you don't
merit to
give that
that.
much power to the big journals.
And I want to say, not all journals, for example, JOSPT is a great journal. They really believe in the science. Their editor is an impeccable editor. The work they do is very, very strong. And I am affiliated with JOSPT, but I'm affiliated with it because it's a great journal. There are others that are great journals too. Like British Journal of Sports Medicine is a terrific journal. They're very strict about what goes into the journal. They like to publish work that is meaningful. The Archives of Physical Medicine and Rehab is another really good journal. I think that they do things the right way. So there are solid journals out there. Not all journals are money hungry and really push for profits. JOSPT has started a JOSPT Open, which is an open access journal, but they're only requiring a $1,000 article processing fee, which is a full $1,300 less than the average amount. So I think most authors can afford that, to have work that's open access to everyone. And I like the direction that they're going.
Yeah. Well, I had no idea that they would charge still like that much, because they're just, what is their cost, right? They don't have it doesn't seem like they have a big cost.
So JOSPT, they have a typical publication, which is not open access. And you get it if you're an orthopedic section member. You can have access to the journal. But if you published a paper, or if I published a paper, and we wanted all people, even outside of those individuals in the Orthopedic Academy, to have access to that paper, even outside all of the journals that have subscriptions to JOSPT, we would pay the $1,000 to have it open access. That's a pretty good deal. That way, a lot of people will read your work. People are more likely to cite your work because you want your work read and cited. Over 50% of the publications that occur each year are never even read beyond the author and the peer reviewer. No one ever even downloads the paper to read it. It just languishes in a black hole. And no author wants that with all the work they put into publishing. So open access is attractive, but it can be done in a way that doesn't really pilfer the authors.
Yeah, because in that process, it seems like the burden is on the author, because they have to spend their time and money and effort to create the paper. Then they have to pay to submit it and to have open access. And it just looks like a good deal for the journal.
Yep. Look, science is not cheap. I mean, I'm in one randomized controlled trial that's going to end up costing millions of dollars. And if you have to take money away from the science so that you can pay to have a paper published, then that's less than you can do for the science sake. And that's one of the biggest complaints, is that, there's only a certain amount of money to go around. And if we're using all of that money to pay for publishing, then it's going to cheat the science. And so that's a consideration too, with respect to the high cost associated with publishing.
Yeah, absolutely. Chad, before we transition to the final questions, do you have anything else, any consideration about everything that we just talked?
Yeah, I want to just reiterate that it's easy to shoot arrows at peer-reviewed publishing, and there are some warts There are some challenges. There are some ethical issues. There are fake papers. There's fraud. There's predatory journals. But there's also a lot of good science. And the reason why people care, people like me, is I don't want the good science to compete with the bad science. And I don't want publishing companies to be the catalyst on why there's more bad science out there. So I just really want to frame it that way, that this is a credibility issue. And if you're a researcher, the kiss of death is if people don't take you seriously as a researcher. They don't think your work is credible. So it really does matter where you publish it. It matters what other people are doing, because I liken this to the steroid era in baseball. So if I can't make a baseball reference, then I'm not doing my job, all right? But during the steroid era, there were a few people that took steroids, and they completely discredited all the other players during that era, even those who didn't take steroids. My concern is if we have kind of a janky system, that we start discrediting credible work. And that's where we're drifting, and we need to halt that if we can.
Yeah. And asking you the final questions, now is going to be a difficult resource of information. Anything in particular that you like? I was going to say any paper that you like.
So, I get asked that question a lot. Where do you get your information? And I just go on PubMed and I look for topics that I'm interested in. And then I look at the credibility of the authors and I look at the credibility of the journal. And then I'll pull that information from there. And it really depends on what I'm working on. So with respect to science, that's what I do. Outside of that, I listen to a lot of podcasts because I think it's a shortcut to get into the authors' heads and to really find out what people are doing. I really believe in podcasts. And most of the podcasts I listen to are economics podcasts. I like the Journal, the Wall Street Journal. I listen to that. I listen to The Economist. I think a person can learn a lot from those, and that are also, that are also specific to healthcare. So that podcasts are a big place, and then PubMed.
Awesome. And what would be the best advice that you give to clinicians that are starting their careers? So that could be general, or could be if you have any advice specific about research, anything that you think would be relevant.
Well, I think with respect to research, I think it's important that let people marinate and learn the profession first before they get into research, because I think the best researchers are those that maybe have a strong clinical context and have I was a clinician for 10 years before I got into research, and I think it really helped shape my research questions. With respect to what I would tell a new clinician, and I really firmly believe this, and I hope when I say this, it comes across the right way. I think we're in an era where we teach students ideologies that people should be this. And then students get out and they believe that the patients should match the clinician's ideology. I don't believe that's why physical therapists should get into being a physical therapist. I believe you should get into it to help the patient. So I believe that new clinicians, the first thing they should recognize is the second most important person in that room is them, and the most important person is the patient. And you work with that patient, regardless of what you think, feel, or believe about that person in front of you. They're the most important person, and they're the person that you are there to help, and you must find a way to help them, not find a way to make them believe what you believe.
Yeah, that's a great advice, because sometimes I think PTs are so stuck in their ideas and they think that technique is the best, but sometimes the patient doesn't want that, doesn't like touch, and you want to do manual therapy. Some people just say, I don't like you to touch me, I don't want to touch. And you just have to kind of feel what the patient needs and be open to let them guide the treatment.
Yep, fully agree.
Yeah. And the last question, what personal qualities or abilities that you think are important to become a successful PT?
So I think a lot. There are a lot of them. I think empathy is critical. The best clinicians that I've seen, and certainly the caregivers that I would want treating me or my family, would be those that have realistic, legitimate empathy for their patients. I believe people who I really do believe the best clinicians are those that are curious, who do not feel they know everything. They're constantly looking for a way to improve on what they do, and they are never satisfied with their level of knowledge. And those are the best researchers too, by the way. The greatest researchers I know are the ones that are just absolutely plagued by ideas that they have, and they have to figure out a way to investigate that idea. Clinicians can do that as well, and constantly looking for ways to improve how they manage their patients. I think those two things are critical. I think being a good colleague is critical as well. So a person who is easy to work with, who is there for you. Being a PT is not an easy job, and if you work with a bunch of stinkers, I mean, that makes your job even more difficult. So having colleagues that are supportive of you, that are a very collegial person, a person that has your back, I think those are pretty amazing qualities.
Awesome. Chad, if people want to learn more about you or contact you, how can they find you?
So I'm really only active on one social media platform, and that's Twitter. And that's at Chad Cook PT. So if you want to follow me, I don't tweet a lot. I don't tweet a lot of nonsense. I tweet things that are important to me. And then also, if you go to PubMed and you type in my name, I do publish a lot. Someone told me the other day that I publish a lot. I do a lot of research on the day-to-day stuff we do as PTs. And I said, thank you, because that is what I do. And so a lot of the work I do, I think, is relevant to what we do.
Yeah. And that's, I guess, how it should be. It's very practical for your day-to-day. It's really helping people that are practicing, right? Perfect. Chad, thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us. I'm super happy that we make this happen. So I appreciate your time.
Thanks for talking about peer-reviewed publishing. I really appreciate it, and it's been wonderful to meet you.